Welcome to TNT Episode 17, Ted and Frank. Ted and Frank, well, those are the names of two different authors that we're going to talk about today. Christian fiction authors. And
Ted Dekker and Frank Peretti. May have heard of them, may have not. They are definitely very popular weird in terms of Christian literature. Ted Dekker
write
more so than Frank Peretti.
a genre of literature that I would say is
like
more
supernatural thriller.
Yeah,
mostly.
that's a good way to put it. Yeah, they're kind of like
tend to be actiony and
the
spiritual
Christian
warfare-y.
Stephen King kind of thing.
Kind of.
Yeah.
That's
one way to put it.
mm-hmm.
So Taylor wanted to talk about a book that they actually co-authored called The House. This is not to be confused with another book.
The Shack. Actually, I think it's just House.
Oh, it's just House.
That'll help you to differentiate it even a little bit more.
See, there's no the in the title.
Actually, every person I've told House about originally thought I was talking about The Shack, and they're
Yeah.
two completely different
This is
books.
The Shack, which is
This
not
is written by William Young.
Why don't we have a copy of House, though? If we're
I
doing
should have brought it.
That's okay.
I had it in the other week.
Taylor will put up something, maybe a link or something that
Yes.
can help you get there, and if you want to buy it or
Mm-hmm.
something like that. And so we're going to just talk a little bit about this book. And first of all, how does it compare to other books that Frank Peretti and Ted Dekker have written? I mean, is it a lot like them? Is it different in some ways?
First off, it feels a lot more like Ted Dekker than it does Frank Peretti. I haven't read a huge number of Frank Peretti books as compared with the Ted Dekker books that I've read.
Mm-hmm.
I've read Ted Dekker's Heaven trilogy, his Circle series, his Paradise novels.
Do you recommend all those?
I would recommend...
He reads them all, but he doesn't recommend them.
I completely recommend the Heaven trilogy. Those are really good books.
Mm-hmm.
And as for the Circle series, I'd advise you to start with Black and then maybe read... I know, you could read until all the way around to Green, and then if you like how Green is, then the Paradise novels are pretty good too, and they're kind of the same feel. And so, it's definitely an acquired taste.
Did you, you said it's more like Ted Dekker,
right,
this
and
book. So
just to clarify what I've read of Frank Peretti's, I've only really read Piercing the Darkness and...
Not This Present Darkness?
Yes, I've read This Present Darkness, which I think is the first one, and then Piercing the Darkness I think was the second one. And I love those too. I haven't really read anything else.
Those, by the way, in case you're not familiar, those are like his classic books. The two big bestsellers early on that he wrote. That was years ago, probably late 80s, early 90s even, that they came out.
I highly recommend both of those.
So that's Frank Peretti.
Right. And so, I honestly would have liked to feel more of the Frank Peretti vibe in the book than so much of the Ted Dekker. The ending felt more like Frank Peretti. Most of the way leading up to it felt more like
Maybe Ted Dekker wrote it and Frank Peretti wrote the ending.
Maybe.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to touch on the plot a little bit. I don't really want to ruin it too much. This definitely isn't a very mainstream thing. I don't think very many people will be familiar with it in the first place. But
so we don't want to give it away.
It's starts out with a couple arguing. It kind of felt like a Children of the Corn kind of thing. I kept getting that vibe early on in the book, but they're going along and they run over some broken glass or something, and they have to get out, and they walk along until they find this house that's being used as a bed and breakfast kind of place by this really odd family, and there's some other people there that also came in because they were unable to go any further. They might have ruined the broken glass or whatever too. And lots of really weird, disjointed stuff goes on, and eventually they're driven into the basement of the house where all this really bizarre stuff is going on, and very dark imagery stuff. It was very confusing for most of the book.
And if Taylor says it's confusing, then it's confusing, let me tell you.
It was confusing enough that reading back through it again, I still couldn't figure out what the heck was going on. And
so that's why you think Ted Dekker wrote it?
Yes.
Okay.
And the villain of the book is a character connected to the same
Circles.
universe. It's the same universe as the Circle series books, and
But it's
much
not our
more.
universe. Well, it's kind of like,
It's supposed to be our universe.
okay,
And,
interconnecting stories, so to speak.
Right. It's a character called Barsidius White, who's created by Marsubius Black, who was a main character in the Paradise series, which is an offshoot of the Circle series. So it does connect, and it filled in a blank that I was confused about in the Paradise series. So there's that. It ends a little bit. I was kind of surprised by the ending. I'm not really sure in a good or bad way.
Okay.
It was just different than what I was expecting. By the time I got to the end, I didn't know what to expect, and it gave an ending that was more or less satisfying. So
Well, that's good.
I had that going for it.
So would you say that the more you read Ted Dekker, the more things kind of make sense because it's all part of this
Yes.
universe?
Definitely.
So maybe you should actually read his stuff because the more you read
Yeah,
it, the more it
the-
makes sense.
The biggest thing that takes getting used to is how spiritual warfare works in the kind of world thing that he's created, because it seems like evil's winning a lot of times, which is really confusing, and then even after everything ends, it's still hard to figure out what the
Yeah.
good part of it was. But it's an interesting perspective that you don't really see that much. I can't
Mhm.
say I really love it, but he's a really good writer, and
So if you like thriller type stuff, if
Mhm.
you like unusual, paranormal type stuff,
it's a Christian horror story that's a little darker than a lot of Christian horror stories. And I did read Frank Peretti's Monster, which did kind of feel in some ways the
a
same
little bit
kind of
like
thing.
that. Okay.
Right, so if you like either of those authors, then I recommend the book. If you don't, this is probably not the book you want to start on for either author. Because
Would you recommend these books for people just totally unfamiliar with Christian authors in general?
I don't think
If they
I
like
would.
that genre?
I
No.
would
Okay.
probably recommend Frank Peretti but I don't think
Okay.
I'd recommend Ted Dekker unless you really knew what you were
So there you
doing
have it
for.
from Taylor. He is recommending, if you're watching and you're not familiar with any of this more, he's recommending Frank Peretti.
Mhm.
And Ted Dekker's for kind of certain taste of people.
Yeah. If you decide you like the darker aspects of Frank Peretti stuff, I suggest you pick up Black. That's probably the most mainstream of Ted Dekker stuff, and like I said, also I recommend the Heaven trilogy. It's completely different than the rest of his books, and it's still got the same worldview kind of thing going on,
Yeah.
but it's a really good series born of a lot of the stuff that he went through, and it really comes out, and it's a really strong series of stories.
All right. Well, thanks for sharing that about those books. And I hope that gives you something to think about. We enjoy talking about books, talking about movies, and other interesting topics. So we hope you enjoyed this episode. Next week we've got a really interesting episode coming up. So we hope you'll watch that. Thanks a lot for watching.
Subscribe, spread the word, and see you next time.